Good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session of the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of July 25th, 2023. We will resume this afternoon with our public hearing agenda. This meeting is being held in person in our hearing room at the David N. Jenkins Municipal Building, but also being held via Zoom for the public to participate remotely. And the session is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel for anyone who would like to watch the proceedings. And with that, I'll turn it over to Corey Harrell to take us through the afternoon agenda items.
All right, thank you very much. We'll start the afternoon agenda with public hearing item number 4. LPC 23-11675. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1390, Lot 64, 10 East 76th Street in the Upper East Side Historic District. A roadhouse designed by John J. Bond in 1881-82 and altered in the Beaux-Arts style by Schwartz and Gross in 1907-08. The application is to replace areaway ironwork installed without LPC permits, replace windows, alter the rear facade, and construct a rear yard addition and rooftop bulkheads.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Erin Ruley, Higgins Quays Barth and Partners. Click on this and get started. Am I advancing from the arrows or the mouse? Sorry. Oh. Yeah.
You should be able to advance using arrow keys.
Yeah, let's ask you.
Do you want me to try again?
Try with them. Abby, if you could try one more time, and if that doesn't work, maybe you could advance the slides for us with next slide.
Okay, try the arrow keys now. Perfect.
There we go. Okay, great. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Erin Ruley, Higgins Quays Barth and Partners. We are the preservation consultants for this project at 10 East 76th Street. I'm joined by John Wall of Stephen Harris Architects. I'm going to take you through some of the history and the restoration proposed for the front facade, and then John's going to take you through the specifics of the design. Let's see. There we go. So here on the left, we have the existing building, number 10 East 76th. It's on the south side of 76th Street between 5th and Madison in the Upper East Side Historic District. As Corey mentioned, this was an earlier row house that was converted in 1907-1908 by Schwartz and Gross in the Beaux-Arts style, and it was expanded significantly. We'll take a look at that as we get through the presentation. It was most recently used as a doctor's office and apartments on the upper floors, and it's being converted back to a single family residence. And the scope of work includes replacing the existing non-historic railing at the entryway. That's the subject of a long-standing violation, which will be addressed through this project. Restoring the windows on the second, third, and fourth floors, which were originally 1/1 double hung windows, and at the rear, reconfiguring some of the existing rear yard extensions, and at the rooftop, there's elevator bulkhead, stair bulkhead, some mechanical and railings. Here, just to give you a sense of the context within the block. And so what you're seeing here is number 10 is highlighted. As I mentioned, it was expanded significantly. So it bumped out in the front and it bumped out on the rear. There's almost a full 6th floor that's been added. You can see it slightly set back from the front facade, but that extends all the way back to the rear, the full depth of the rear extension. And so we don't see here is a cohesive mid-block condition, no intact donut or common green space. And there's also no discernible row. So no continuity between the adjacent buildings and number 10 itself. The existing, which let me see if I can get the cursor to point. That back here, this existing this is full 6 stories there. And so we're going to be redistributing some of that bulk and breaking it down a bit. 2 other sites to note within this block. Immediately to our east is number 12 East 76th Street. And that it was essentially a new building that's been that was approved by the commission in 2010. And then just to the south here is 9 through 13 East 75th Street. That's the Herzog and de Meuron 3-row house merger with the rear yard walls that we see at the back. So there's been quite a bit of change within the block, in addition to the taller apartment buildings that have been introduced. So here we see the building over time. The original photo on the left is circa 1910. This is right after the building has been expanded by Schwartz and Gross. And so you can see the original balustrade at the base of the building and the 1/1 windows. And then by the time of the tax photograph in 1940, you can see that there are multi-light steel casement windows that have been added at the 2nd and 3rd floor only. And those were leaded glass in steel casements. And then in the photo on the right, this is circa 2006. So what this is showing is the existing railing, which had been added in around 1990, the previous owner removed the historic railing and it was replaced with this without benefit of permit. And then at the top, the multi-light windows at the 4th floor were a staff level approval in 1995, I believe. So here is the historic condition of the railing at the entryway and the existing today. The previous owner attempted to legalize the existing railing, and the commission denied that in the 1990s. Here is the existing railing and our proposed railing, which restores the original design of the balustrade, but executes it in cast stone. In 1996, the previous owner, in trying to resolve the violation, came forward with an application to install a new cast stone balustrade at the entryway that was approved in 1996. And the commission based their findings on 3 primary points. One, that the balustrade is consistent with others you see of this type and style in the district, that the material was consistent with the overall palette of the building, and that it resonated or recalled the design of the balustrades on the 2nd and 4th floor. And so here we see the details of the existing balustrades on the 2nd and 4th floor. And on the right, just another example of a Beaux-Arts style building on the Upper East Side that has a stone balustrade at the entryway. And of course, there's a whole host of options in terms of how entries were articulated in the Beaux-Arts style. And these are sort of three groupings of different approaches: the stone balustrade, metal railings, and then stone cheek walls. And I think what you see here is that there's certainly a context for the stone, using stone in lieu of the original material at the entryway, but that metal railings in most of the Beaux-Arts buildings are more, have a lighter, sort of more ornamental character that you see on the upper floor railings here, but we also see that in the base. And so we think what we're proposing today is really consistent, not only with the commission's previous approval, but in keeping with what we see throughout the district. Moving on to the windows. The original windows were 1/1 double hung windows. We see those here this is a detail from that 1910 photograph. And on the right is the existing condition. And so what we have are three generations of windows here. In the 1920s or 30s, the steel casements were introduced at the second and third floors. The existing leaded glass remains. It's somewhat fragmentary and in rather poor condition at the second floor. The third floor is replacement glazing and caming. And then the fourth floor is, of course, a 1990s window that replaced not leaded glass windows at the fourth floor. These windows were not part of a broader, more significant alteration that we see in other parts, in other projects, and they were really sort of a standalone change on the building. And we think that going back to the 1/1 is more consistent with the Beaux-Arts style of the building. And here we see just three examples where of the sort of 1/1 typical window configuration for Beaux-Arts buildings in the historic district. And then finally, here is the proposed restorative scope of work. So replicating the original design at the entryway, but executing it in cast stone, restoring the 1/1 window configuration at the second, third, and fourth floor windows. The existing windows at the ground floor are the original, so we have very good details to match to. Up at the upper floor, this is the sixth floor, that existing sixth floor that's set back behind the mansard, modifying that window opening a bit, and that is non-visible from any location. And then there at the rooftop, which John will talk to in a bit more detail, but there's the stair bulkhead, the elevator bulkhead, and some mechanical equipment that have some limited visibility. And I think from here, John is going to dig in.
Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to see you in person. It's been a while. On the rear of the building, the mouse is the best. Arrows?
John, can you just state your name for the record?
Certainly. John Wool, Stephen Harris Architects. On the rear of the building, this is the existing condition, not what one would expect to find looking at the front of the building. We particularly have enjoyed looking at the suitcase hanging condensers on the back, which quite a unique way to install them. This is a dead-on view from the back looking up. You'll see that AstroTurf on the image there. What's confusing is one thinks that might be grade, but it's not. There were extra beams left over when some work was being done, and they ended up being shooked into the backyard here. And they float about 4.5 feet above grade. And then someone threw AstroTurf and plywood on top of them. And you have to climb up across the windowsill of those little windows and slide out them in order to be able to enjoy the benefit of that outdoor space. So we are proposing no changes to grade at all. Interestingly, the site was fully excavated sometime in the past, but the slab is on grade in the rear. There is also, and you can see just barely, there's a one-story extension of this that goes all the way to the rear lot line. And so that's being removed as part of our proposal. Giving you a sense here now in 3D, you'll see on the left the one-story extension that will be removed. And then we've tried to illustrate the platform that's floating there in the rear yard. So we will return to what is the natural grade of the property. We are proposing at the top to remove about 17.5 feet of that projecting deep 6-story extension and reduce it now to 5 stories. We are proposing to add a 5-foot deep extension on 5 stories, pushing out that rear slightly. And then on top of that reduced rear yard, we are proposing to install a 12-foot tall recreation space with enclosed mesh to protect it. Looking at them in context, so we will be removing the top floor of the building mass at the furthest extent of the rear, and then constructing the recreation yard on top of that. And then we will be refenestrating the rear facade with a regular organized set of glazing. On the 5-story extension that we're doing, we will again be removing that portion that you see there with the very large glazing and the small balconies, and doing a like opening to match the rest of the rear. And at the very top on the existing 6-story rear extension, we are proposing to put in a clear story window. This is looking at that extension. The white portion, the mass, represents the neighbor's building, and then here's proposed. So proposed is a series of punched openings. The top 5th floor of the rear extension will be glazed with a parapet around it and a raised sill, and then above that would be the recreation yard. And then the clear story wraps around onto the east side slightly. Looking at this within context, as Aaron had mentioned, we will be reducing the size of this, because right now with that 1-story extension, it goes all the way to the rear lot line. We'll be pulling that back. We are extending out on the east side approximately 5 feet. Within the donut of the block, as Aaron suggested, there's been quite a lot of variety approved by the commission. Here is 1913 East 75th, currently still under construction. More or less directly behind us, 3 full townhouses with a full glazing. Immediately adjacent to us is the 12 East 76th Street project, which was approved to extend up the rear facade and reconfigure the rear facade at the same time. So it's refenestrated, extended up, and the perimeter was adjusted as part of this approval. So that's what you're seeing in here, and you'll see the existing condition more or less of our house represented on the edge of that drawing. At the top, we are proposing an elevator bulkhead, a stair bulkhead, and some mechanical equipment. This is the mock-up, and I'll take you through the potential visibility for it. Looking directly across the street, no visibility. Going slightly west, no visibility. Going a little bit further west, there's a tiny bit of visibility of some mechanical equipment. Going far west, that's not visible any longer by the time you get to 5th Avenue. On the east side, heading towards Madison, you see 2 pieces of mechanical equipment a little ways down the block from across the street. And then as you get to the intersection, you see the railing and you see a little bit of mechanical equipment. And then lastly, here, you'll see a little bit of the elevator bulkhead and the stair bulkhead, all seen against not the sky, but the secondary facade of the 5th Avenue building on the corner of 76th and 5th. And then these are materials, again, in the front. I think Aaron explained the historic materials and the cast stone that we would like to use. And on the rear, these would be steel painted casement windows, metal mesh, and painted brick. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions, commissioners? Commissioner Jefferson.
I have a question about the rear facade. You have the history of the front facade. What is the history of the rear facade?
I think as Aaron pointed out, it appears that the Schwartz and Gross expansion of the house that created the Beaux-Arts facade, but then also maximized the opportunity in the back, appears to have created that massing, but the fenestration clearly looks as though it was altered over time. So I don't believe that the fenestration, especially with the arches, had anything to do with the original design. Okay.
Thank you.
The arched windows are 1997. They were commission approved in the 90s. The window openings were enlarged. And so at the 5th and 6th floor, they added those windows.
Was the L part of
The L, yes. Yes, was part of the 1907, 1908 alterations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Ginsburg.
Is it possible to chemical equip that back so it's less visible from the screen?
Let me try to show one of the challenges with doing that. So this is the roof plan. The challenge that we've got is that the elevator and the stair are pulling themselves back to the middle of the building to be able to serve the core and be sort of as far from visibility as makes sense. So those two bring themselves to the roof right in the very middle there. To the front, we have the required 6-foot wide fireman's path that the fire department now requires us to maintain. And so while I would hope we could incrementally kind of shift them further west and make them less visible, the problem is that's going to block the fireman's path. So the only other option would be to explore the possibility of trying to push them behind the elevator bulkhead, which sort of makes it a more kind of disorganized landscape up there in roofscape. And we would have much less usable active space.
Is that mechanical equipment to electrify the building? Still be using fossil fuel?
There will still be gas being used in the building, but these are electric heat pumps.
So would the gas be used for
Cooking.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, let's see if we have any public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on this item? Okay, not seeing anyone. Jeremy, please come up. Sorry, I didn't have a sign-in sheet.
Good afternoon, I'm Jeremy Willow, speaking for the Victorian Society of New York. We're happy to see the intended restoration of the design of the historic balustrade flanking the street entrance of 1076. But we must issue a cautionary comment regarding the replacement of the street facing windows. We are, of course, understanding and sympathetic to the fact that the current windows appear more translucent than transparent, especially in the second floor. And we can appreciate that the owner may desire to see out clearly. That said, the leaded glass windows on the second and third floors were installed in the 1920s and represent a century's worth of history at 1076. Yes, they were not part of the original design, but it would be a shame if they were lost. Should the restoration of the 1/1 windows be approved, the new windows should match the original as closely as possible. The proposal commits to this without providing details about the intended materials or details, which we would like clarification on. We would urge the use of wood frames and sash with a short restoration glass that replicate their original appearance and preserve the integrity of the building.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this item? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Gregory Powell to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We received a few signups for this item, and I see those hands raised, so we'll be hearing from those people. The first sign up is Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Sorry. Lucy Levine, are you with us?
Hello, commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this to be a challenging application. We are aware that the divided lights on the front facade are not original to this building, but since their installation on the second and third floors in the 1920s, they have become a compelling element of the facade. As such, we believe they should be maintained or accurately recreated. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Nuha Ansari from the Friends of the Upper East Side. So Nuha Ansari, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and say your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Chair Carroll, Honourable Commissioners, my name is Nuha Ansari and I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. I hope you can hear me better this time. Friends Preservation Committee appreciates the applicant's intent to restore the Schwartz and Gross Beaux-Arts details on this row house, including reversing the non-historic areaway railing and installing a cast stone balustrade that resembles the original conditions, and replacing the current casement windows with 1/1 double-hung windows that are in keeping with the Beaux-Arts style. On the rear facade, we believe the proposed fenestration patterns on the south and east elevations and the reconfiguration of the volumetric expression of the rear yard additions create a more harmonious organization of the rear facade, and we do not object to the increase in glazing. We do, however, ask the applicants to work to minimize the visibility of the rooftop elevator bulkhead and mechanical equipment from the public way. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised, so I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends approval. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you very much. So would you like to respond to the comments we've heard? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. And I think there are 2 issues just to touch on. The windows. The windows will be wood, and they will be based on, the details can be based on the existing historic windows on the first floor. As I mentioned, there are 3 generations of windows at the second, third, and fourth floors, none of which are consistent with the Beaux-Arts style. And we think that the combination of restoring the balustrade and the windows really sort of restores the quiet dignity of the building, which has been sort of diminished over time. The existing windows were not part of a sort of standard 1920s makeover of the building. And if it were, I think this would be a very different conversation, but they're sort of standalone interventions and not tied to anything greater. And so for that reason, we think that restoring back to the 1909 condition is the right move. Can I control this screen, or maybe is Abby controlling?
Yes, you still have control.
I still have control. Great. Thank you. I just want to touch on the visibility a little bit. It's always hard when in talking about these things, we go to the zoom, right? You always sort of, your eye is drawn to the zoom view. But so just sort of focusing on the left and understanding what the visibility is in the normalized view of in the streetscape. So the view is over representing, I think the zoomed view over represents what we're seeing. And of course it's in orange and not rendered here. So it's really quite minimal. And this would be the elevator bulkhead, I believe, that's popping up, and it'll have a stucco finish. And then similarly, as we get to Madison, as we're starting to move to the east, you can see in the overall view, it's actually quite minimal in appearance in terms of its visibility. The bottom view here is the rendered view. So you're getting the opportunity to see the railing, and the view through the railing, and then the finish of the mechanical units there. But again, stepping back and looking at it in the overall context, this sort of very active roofscape, and how that is just sort of sits within that overall collage effect in this view. And similarly here, I think that's the case And this is a very limited view, which again, in the overall view is at quite a distance. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. And commissioners, any final questions on this one? Yeah.
It's the rendering that you're planning on making the cast stone railings a dark color. Am I misperceiving
I
that?
think that's
Yeah.
represented. Yeah.
So they're intended to be like limestone
This
color.
the limestone matched facade. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, any other final questions? All right, let's move to close the hearing. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you make a motion to close the hearing? Thank you. And Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And we have two components on the front facade. One is to replace ironwork at the areaway entrance steps that was installed by a prior owner without permits with a cast stone balustrade that matches a design that was previously approved by the commission when the prior owner was addressing the violation but never installed. And also the applicant has shown that the style balustrade is consistent with the Beaux-Arts style in this particular historic district. The second part of the front facade is the question of the removal of the later windows that represent multiple generations to restore them to the 1/1 wood configuration that was found at the time the building was originally redesigned. And then at the back to reconfigure the additions by actually pulling back sort of a couple of reductions and then a slight increase adjacent to the L and with a new fenestration pattern and a play area. And then finally, the third area is the rooftop where there is some visibility of the mechanical equipment in the bulkhead, and the applicant has shown that is seen largely from distances within a varied roofscape. So we'll have a discussion on those three areas of work: the front, the roof, and the rear. Commissioner Jefferson, would you like to start this one?
Oh, sure. So the architectural strategy here is the front facade to replicate the historical front facade. And the back is to reorganize the rear facade and to recreate some kind of order. When we start with the front facade, it's appropriate to replicate historic balustrade and cast iron gate. So the front facade is appropriate. To replace the windows, absolutely appropriate. The rear facade, I had a conflict last night because I wasn't sure what was the original fabric. So I didn't know which was which, but assuming it's all original fabric, it's appropriate then to extend the two pieces, the one piece out, and the materiality of the addition is in keeping with the buildings in that context. So I can approve that. The construction of the rooftop addition, it's minimally visible from certain spots, but it is visible, and I could accept the limitation of that visibility. The mechanical units, though, I think are a little excessive, and I think it was mentioned by the staff that should be moved further back if possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Chu?
Yes, I agree with all of Commissioner Jefferson's comments.
All right, Commissioner Master?
I agree as well, and I don't have anything else to add.
Commissioner Lutfi? Vice Chair Bland?
I just want to note that the window replacement could have gone either way. I think there is something that's been part of the history for is something we often encourage when it's before us. I don't think in this case we require it, so I can support going back to the original, since we have the documentation both in photographs, but also I think I heard in reality, there's a continuing window in place so that they can really get the details right. So I can support that as well as all the other things that people have already mentioned, which I am in agreement with. I just wanted to mention the window part.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Chen,
Yes, well, given the limitations.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
I agree.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Agreed.
Okay, so I think that we can make a motion to approve the work as proposed with the applicant stipulating that the applicant work with the staff to reduce the visibility of the HVAC units. So Commissioner Jefferson, thank you.
So item number 4, about the right hand one.
Sorry. We're out of LPC-23 -11675, East 76th Street, Upper East Side Historic District. Application is to replace areaway ironwork installed without landmarks preservation commission permits, replace windows, alter the rear facade, and construct rear yard addition and rooftop bulkhead. I know that the building style, scale, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historical character of the Upper East Side Historic District. I also note that the one double hung windows from the 1907 facade alterations were gradually replaced over time with multiple light leaded glass casement windows. I recommend approval with modifications that the proposed work will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features of the building, that the leaded glass casement windows were added in separate campaigns over time and did not coincide with any alteration to the facade. Therefore, their installation is not a significant later alterations. It's not a significant later alteration. That the proposed windows at the front facade will match the windows original to the significant 1907 alteration. That the proposed cast iron store balustrade at the area railing will be in keeping with the typical railing designs found throughout this historic district and will help return this feature closer to its historic appearance. That the proposed work at the rear facade and the rear yard will not be visible from public thoroughfares. That the building is not a part of a road, and the rear facade at the building at this block features a variety of conditions. Therefore, the proposed reconfiguration of volume of the rear facade will not diminish this building relationship to its neighboring buildings around the central green space or further obscure the original building massing. That the proposed rear yard addition will not project further than the central green space than the existing L and will reestablish heights of the original cornice line. That the design and material of the rear yard addition features painted brick cladding, steel windows, and color assemblies, and cast iron lintels will be in keeping with the residential scale and character of other buildings in this block. That the removal of the top floor of the rear L will help differentiate the massing between the rear and top of the building. And the construction of the glazed clear story will further break down the scale and massing of the rear L. That the location and transparency transparent nature of the metal mesh cladding of the play enclosure will have a light presence at the top of the L, and that the proposed rooftop bulkhead will only be minimally visible from the corridors at a distance and will not call undue attention to themselves, and will be typical of rooftop accretions commonly found of buildings of this type within the historic district in terms of material and finish. I do find, however, that the mechanical units at the front of the penthouse roof are visible from public thoroughfares over the dormer of the adjacent buildings and will distract from the streetscape. Therefore, I recommend that the mechanical units be shifted further back on the roof to reduce their visibility in public thoroughfares.
Thank you. Commissioner Chu, would you second that motion?
I second.
Right. Well, John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland. Aye. Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
None in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, so that's approved, and just work with the staff on the visibility of those units. And I also want to recognize Ryan Z, who again has been here for a while, but this is his first public hearing presentation. So his first introduction to you all, commissioners, and glad to have you here, Ryan. Thanks. Thank you.
I will now move to public hearing item number 5, LPC 23-11878. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1413, lot 26, 163 to 165 East 78th Street, the 163 to 165 East 78th Street house individual landmark. This is a pair of vernacular row houses with Italianate style influences built in 1861 and later combined and enlarged. The application is to modify an entry, alter the penthouse, construct rear yard and rooftop additions, and excavate to lower the cellar floor. Okay.
I was waiting for an introduction. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ward Dennis with Higgins, Quays, Barth and Partners. I'm joined by Tom Zoli of Workshop, who is the architect for the project, and our other colleagues. Am I just going to? Yes. Okay. So the project here is 163 East 78th Street, as you can see in the center image. It was originally constructed as a pair of row houses in 1861 and then modified in a series of alterations in the early 20th century, culminating in 1940 with the addition of the third floor on the top. As you can see in the axon on the right, our proposal is in part to construct a rooftop bulkhead with mechanical equipment, an elevator override, and a couple hundred square feet of occupiable space. We are also proposing to extend out the rear yard with a rear yard addition, which you will see in a few minutes. Again, we are on East 78th Street between Lexington and 3rd. This is actually one of a row of individual landmark designations. The project is entirely as of right for zoning. Here is our block context and an overview of the block. Our building is the right-hand most in a row of what were originally 5 1861 Italianate row houses. I feel like part of my job today is talk about the early history of the Landmarks Commission, but in 1965, when these were designated, the commission was largely it was often designating groups of individual buildings rather than designating a district. So this is not a district. This is now 4 individual buildings that were designated. And there are a number of groupings like this across the Upper East Side. I'm not sure if the commission was not willing to look at these smaller groupings as districts or what, but it seems to have been common in that era. The three other buildings in the row were also constructed in 1861. The one to the far west, 157, has a mansard addition from 1877. This is just the existing on the left of our building, and then the existing on the right of the rear elevation. That top floor that you're looking at on the rear is the 1940 addition, and you can see that it was integrated very seamlessly into the building. The brickwork is very consistent throughout. The fenestration pattern does change. That row of windows at the second floor was the original top of the building. You can also, again, it's been very well integrated. It's very hard to tell where where one stops and the other picks up. You can also see the small rear extension that exists off the back of the building. So history-wise, these were constructed as a pair of buildings in 1861. In about 1911, they were purchased together, and by 1916, they had been combined into a single building. There was also a major renovation in the late 1920s that altered the facade. And then in 1939 to 40, the third floor addition and that rear yard condition that you see, that you saw on the last slide, was created. You can also see in these slides and coming up that the rear extension changed a lot over time. The view on the left is 1928, and this is when the apartment building immediately to our right was under construction. If you look at the second floor windows on our building, you'll see that they are shorter than they are in the photo on the right. And that was when the second floor windows were extended from their historic height to the current height, which is about 8 feet. And at that point, they were modified with casement windows with transom matching what was happening on the parlor floor. And you can see that in the photo on the right. And you can see that as well in this really nice elevation from the New York Times when the building was put up for sale in 1939. Stoops have been removed. Obviously, the buildings have been combined. Other than a small bracket pairing at the cornice, there really is no indication that this was originally a pair of buildings. Even by this time, it was effectively a 1920s design, and with the rooftop addition in 1939, it very much becomes a 1930s design. This shows the entire row in tax photos with our building actually under construction, the rooftop addition being constructed, and they're doing some facade work. You can see the mansard on the far left at 157. The tax photo guys actually went back out the next year and reshot the building when it was done. I did not know that was a feature of tax photos, but apparently it was. So here we see, the newly minted rooftop addition. We can see the extended windows with transoms and casements at the second floor that were installed in the 1920s. Most of the stonework in this image was painted. It's now exposed, and we propose to leave it as exposed. Within the block and within this area of the Upper East Side, there are actually a lot of these types of reborn row houses, as Andrew Dolkart has termed them. We think of them a lot in Greenwich Village, but it was also a very common theme in the Upper East Side in the teens, 20s, and 30s. And we can see some buildings across the street from us that have this similar treatment. None of these are landmarks, but they are consistent with the treatment of buildings on the Upper East Side. And then just the overall blockscape, you can see in red on the top where our building is. There's a very large tree in front of it, unfortunately, in this image, but you can get a sense of the overall shifting scales on this block of buildings. We'd have the smaller row houses, of which we're a part, and then slightly taller row houses, 19th century tenements, 20th century apartment buildings, studio apartment buildings, and the like. So it's a very varied streetscape here. On the rear of the building, you can see the history of modifications on our rear yard extension, starting 1861 with no rear yard, 1911 combined. 1920, the rear extension changes. The current image in the bottom center also reflects alterations to the two buildings immediately to our west, both of which were done with landmarks approval at public hearing post designation. Both buildings had full height rear yard extensions and partial rooftop additions added. Our proposal at the rear is to bring out the rear of our building to match the building immediately to our right in this image, and then extend out the bottom 2 floors about 10 feet beyond that. So here is just again that overall axon showing the proposed addition at the roof. It will be clad in metal. We have a fence that is set back from the front. That canted feature that you see there is a skylight for the stair that comes up from below. The gray clad piece at the roof at the top of the bulkhead is the elevator override. It's a fairly minimal override. And then we have mechanical equipment on top of the bulkhead as well. Viewed from the rear, you can see the bulkhead at the roof from the rear with the mechanical equipment atop. You can see the rear wall brought out to match the building to our right, and the change in fenestration at that top floor to match the second floor below. The parapet at the rear does get taller, and that is creating a railing condition at the rear. We're not adding any height within the building itself. And then we have a small conservatory piece that sits atop the 2-story extension, and then the double height infill at the base. All of the infill is in the gray metal, so that all ties together, and then the brick throughout will match the existing brick. Existing section showing the original building from 1861 and then the 1939 addition set slightly back. The proposed section, note at the front that we are creating a small balcony condition coming off of that 1939 extension that actually will allow us to lower the railing height there. And then at the rear, we are extending out about 9 feet to match the building adjacent. And then the lower 2 stories extend out about 3 feet 6 inches from their existing depth. And we extend that addition across the full width of the building. There is some excavation, which has been reviewed. I believe we submitted all the engineering drawings. It's a fairly minimal excavation. At the rear, we are keeping with slight modifications the existing brick walls. On the front of the building, working from bottom to top, on the far right at the ground floor, there is a service entrance that has a brownstone header over it. To get better height clearance, we're proposing to remove that header and have the 2 doors match each other. I will note that none of the other buildings on this row have that header condition, so we will be consistent with all the buildings throughout the row. At the main entrance, there is a small canopy with brackets, and we are proposing to remove that and install a less wide canopy with no brackets, but otherwise matching what's there. At the second, we will be replacing the windows at the first and second floor. And what we are proposing is full height casements with a faux transom bar. And we're doing that really for technical reasons. If we did double glaze new wood windows with a fixed transom, that transom bar would become a lot heavier. So by doing it as a full height with a faux transom bar, we're actually able to match the dimension of the existing transom bar. And then at the addition top, I mentioned the railing change. We are proposing to lower the windows and widen them slightly. We are also proposing, and I'll show you a detail in a section, to remove the stucco finish at that addition and replace it with brick to match the building below. And then the bulkhead above, which I've described already. And then at the rear, again, we're pulling out the full height rear yard extension to match the extension at the building next door. I think important to note, I know a lot of times the discussion focuses on retention of that top floor. And in this case, the top floor is that 1939 condition with the odd fenestration. That's why we think it is appropriate to do a full height extension here. And also to note that these are individual landmarks rather than a district. So I'm not quite sure how we think about the block context in that context, but and then at the base of the building, we have the 2-story extension. Again, that comes out about 3 feet 6 inches from where we are. It has the metal spandrel infill, which I think is fairly typical for these kinds of extensions. We have a heavier center line there, which I think is thinking about the idea that this was 2 buildings, but maybe that's not the right move on this particular building because it really is one now. And then we have that conservatory piece on that setback, and that was very intentionally designed. And we had a lot of back and forth talking about it amongst ourselves and the staff, but it's designed to make it more as a piece that sits on top of that extension rather than doing it as brick in the same plane with what's below. I think it very much helps to break up the massing. And this second photo from the right is just a plan of the bulkhead. You can see the stair coming up with the canted skylight above and the elevator. And then at the very top is that couple hundred square feet of occupiable space. Most of what's in the bulkhead is really about circulation to provide access to the roof. Details at the front facade. I mentioned that header that we're removing. Again, both doors will match each other in elevation and in depth. And then in the image above showing the full height casement windows with the faux transom bar, which will, when closed, certainly replicate what has been there since the 1920s. There are some existing security cameras big security cameras that we're removing and then proposing some small, more typical current cameras. And then at the front extension from 1939, you can see the existing condition with the painted red stucco. It's not in great condition, so we are proposing to remove that and replace it with brick to match the brick below. We're also in the 2 bottom left images, we are proposing to raise the front parapet, and that's really a roofing detail. Right now, there's no curb. So by raising it up to 12 inches, we can then bring the roofing, flash the roofing into the front parapet. It doesn't change the height within the building, and all of the insulation we're doing for the roof is actually being done underneath rather than on top. So we limit how much we have to raise that roof. And then you can see that balcony condition that we're creating right now. It's just straight over. We'll drop it down to the floor level. That allows us to then put a railing that sits behind the parapet rather than on top. And then that fan security gate will be removed. We did a mock-up on the roof, and we have the visibility studies, of course. The area where the addition is visible is from down the block on Lexington Avenue and a little bit south of 78th Street. Once you're on the block, the addition and the mechanical units are quite minimally visible. And I note in the bottom photos, you'll see that there is very heavy tree cover. So we have provided renderings rather than photos in order to interpret what we're seeing through the trees, because a photo of the mock-up from across the street would not tell you anything. So from the other side of Lexington Avenue, there is about a 20-foot stretch along that side of Lexington Avenue where the addition will be visible. You can see the mock-up on the left, the rendering on the right. We're seeing the top of the bulkhead. We're seeing a little bit of the canted skylight, and then we're seeing some of the mechanical equipment sitting on top. We're also seeing that all in the context of the light well of the building that sits behind us. And the overall, and it is a fairly fleeting, as I said, 20-foot long stretch or so on Lexington. And there is a bit of visibility as you cross Lexington directly at the corner, where you can see, again, the mock-up on the left, the rendering on the right. We can see the bulkhead with just a little bit of the mechanical equipment sticking up above. These are the renderings. Again, these views are currently blocked by trees. We are seeing the top of the bulkhead and a little bit of the mechanical equipment sticking up above, and then a little bit of the fencing along the side elevation. From the east looking back, the only thing we are seeing is a chimney extension. And then from directly across the street, actually standing in the area, in the public area way of the building across the street, we do see a few inches of the bulkhead. You can also see here how we are raising the parapet. We're raising it up to match the height of the sidewalls at the front. So, and then we see a little bit of the mechanical equipment atop the bulkhead. And then at the rear elevation, this is a view looking towards our neighbor. The extension on this building and on the building beyond, again, were previously approved by landmarks. Our proposal is to bring our rear facade out that 9 feet and a couple inches to match that dimension. And then the parapet that you see at the bottom right is the existing rear yard extension that will be raised up to the second story and then extended out about 3 feet 6 inches to the right. And here's an axonometric view showing that with the double height base extension and then the full height rear yard extension with the conservatory sitting on top. Again, at the top of the building, we opted to do a brick parapet with a smaller railing that matches the height of the party wall between the buildings, but it does come up higher than the adjacent building. That's certainly something that could be lowered and just become a railing condition. And here's another view of that. And then the overall view from the front, and we'll gladly take questions.
Thank you very much. All right, commissioners, do we have any questions? Commissioner Goldman?
Why is the sloped skylight area of the bulkhead 11 foot 11 inches tall?
Tom, yeah. So let me just get back to that image.
And could it be shorter?
Could it be shorter? Yeah.
To this section.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. Yes.
I'm only workshop entity. It could go. The short answer is it could come down. We were trying to accommodate as much mechanical equipment inside that bulkhead as well as possible, while creating a clear space of something consistent with the floors below. So we're 8'6" clear on that level. We can certainly bring it down another 6 inches on the interior clear. But we were trying to just also displace some of the mechanical equipment that was on the roof by bringing it inside the building and putting it up in the ceiling as well. With really all construction these days, there's just so much mechanical equipment that we're just moving around and trying to jigsaw puzzle together up there. So that's the short answer. It could come down probably, I would easily another 6 inches. I think the whole thing could come down at that level. And we sloped it back out for obviously sightline reasons.
Okay, other questions?
I have a question on landmark designation. And there are two images here on page 18. And if you go to page 18, is the image on the left when it became landmark designated. So all that ironwork is part of the landmark designation that you see in the windows.
Yes. Yeah, the existing condition is, with the exception of maybe the cameras that are installed, is as the building was at the time of designation, and as it was when it was combined a little over 100 years ago. So it was designated as one building, although interesting, if you read the designation report, again, it talks a lot more about the 1861 building than it does about the building that you're actually looking at. But
so assuming that a landmark is a special building, are you removing the metal work in the windows?
The ironwork on the windows is not historic. It was added. I think it was actually added after designation. The historic ironwork, if I go back to one of the photos, actually matches what we're proposing.
So it doesn't matter when it was designated what they saw, or do you go back to history to see what was there before? Or how?
Well, sometimes we designate buildings and there are modern alterations or modern features on them. And so we ask applicants to look through historic photographs from different periods to try and determine the age and significance.
Okay, thank you.
So if you look at the tax photo, you can see that it has the lower railings, which is what we're proposing to put back. So I think that is staff level. Certainly restored.
Okay, other questions?
Maybe Corey could talk about the issue that was raised about the nature of these designations, these early designations. Do you agree with Ward's assessment of their different nature?
So there's a series of row houses that are each their own individual landmark that we don't necessarily consider the context of one another. That's your question.
I guess so. What I heard Ward say was, well, back in the day, they did these individual things for some reason that seemed to suggest an avoidance, a desire to avoid designating districts. And what I understood from that was that maybe the buildings themselves didn't merit the standards that we currently have or may have for individual landmarks, but that's kind of just the way they did it back in those days.
Well, and I can't speak to this specific designation, but it is true that the commission in evaluating historic districts typically looks at two sides of the street to be able to feel that there's a distinct sense of place. So most of our historic districts have two sides of the street. There are some historic districts that are one side of the street, but there's a permanent context that otherwise supports it. And that's so there are some smaller districts that do that. But from the beginning of time, it seems that there was a concern that just a couple of individual buildings did not constitute a district. And so where buildings are considered significant but don't meet the standards for a historic district, they have in the past been designated as a series of individual landmarks. And the designation report, as was mentioned, it for these particular buildings really talks about them being designated because of their age. I think 1861, right, is the age. And then it does go on to talk about how this one was combined and it is designated as one building. But it seems to be that the designation was seen important because of the age of the buildings.
So the reason I raise it is because we tend to view individual landmarks with greater scrutiny, perhaps, than we do district applications. And the question of whether we should or should not in this case, I guess I'm not sure I hear direction on that.
And I think that the way sometimes we sort of fall back on it, it's an individual landmark, so we should have a higher standard. But really, I think the standards are just slightly different. I don't think we have to think of one as being higher than another. But in the case of an individual landmark, we are looking at the effect of the changes on the significant features for which it's designated as an individual landmark. And when we're looking at changes to buildings within a historic district, we're looking at the effect on that building, but also the collection of the buildings and how it affects that sense of place that we've identified. So in some ways, for a district, it could actually be a broader analysis.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Forget that. So, in designating this, I think I heard that addition on the top is now part of this individual landmark. Is that correct?
So it was there at the time of designation. The report does not speak about it at all, or whether it's significant or not. But it is, again, there are features that are in place at the time of designation that are not significant features, and we have allowed removal. And there are some features that detract from the building that are there at the time of designation. So in some cases, when we have designated buildings within historic districts that have additions that predate the designation at the street wall, we have approved redesigning them to improve their appearance or improve the relationship to the building below. So that's how we've treated some of these pre-designation visible vertical expansions.
Okay, so, but it is part of the building. So, and the landmark. So my question to the applicant is, why did you decide to raise the parapet? Because in a way, it's now calling more attention to it. Whereas, so it has, it's part of the building is more prominent. Just that small bit that you raised, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does raise it. We're raising it about 12 inches. Tom, you want to go? It is really about detailing, right? What I was going to mention is you can kind of see it there a little bit. The idea is that the most prominent view of this building in the neighborhood is from the corner from this corner on the street. From the other corner, it's mostly blocked by the tall 12-story building. And so that corner is the most prominent spot. And we wanted to make it architecturally just consistent, meaning the same height. And we can't, it's a party wall, so we can't lower the height of the party wall, the existing one. It's up about, the end game is about 12 inches higher than the current roof level, because it's a zero parapet condition right now. So we just wanted to bring it up to make it so that corner comes across consistently and doesn't step down, because with current architectural flashing details and all of the, the way that construction happens, it just gets clunky and just doesn't look very good. I can't make that a good historic transition if it has to step down is really the problem. So we brought it up at the front.
Right. Other questions? Okay, let's move to public testimony, and then we may have more questions after that.
I just have one.
Yes, go ahead.
What is the coping of that raised wall?
The existing is
On the right proposed.
it's concrete. The proposed is that metal? Painted stone. So the coping on the
proposed raised
section
historic setback.
Yes, like how it's proposed.
Yes.
It's proposed as metal.
As metal.
Yeah. Simply right one. Yeah.
Okay. And what is the existing condition?
The existing is concrete. It's currently it's meant like a galvanized. Oh, I'm sorry. That wraps over the top.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move to public testimony. Jeremy Woodruff.
Again, Jeremy Willow, speaking for the Victorian Society in New York. Here. We are concerned that the proposed increased height at the front of the penthouse with its lovely defined air of Italian April house makes the rooftop addition unlookable, thus distracting from the original 1861 structure. The Victorian Society always closely evaluates proposed rooftop structures to ensure they don't visually overwhelm building on which they are being added. In the case of 163 to 65 and 78, the combination of the additions increased height along with the gray cornice of the coping works to highlight the penthouse, when instead it's part of the building should exceed. We wonder if there is a way to make the penthouse more visually secondary by adhering to its current dimensions and perhaps also by using alternate exterior materials. Additionally, the wood-facing windows with fixed transoms appear to be original as they appear in every historical illustration. And I do need to correct our written testimony. We understand that the third floor windows were changed in the 1920s, the length, but they appear to match exactly the windows on the first floor, which made in fact the original floor. A townhouse with original windows is an increasing rarity in the city. And on this individual landmark, we urge that the original windows be restored, and it appears from the photographs they are perfectly capable of being restored. If replacement is required, however, because of condition, they must match the historic windows exactly in configuration, operation, materials, details, and finish, including the transit and this projecting transit bar. The details of the existing historic windows are responsible for a considerable part of the character of this building, as can be readily seen in the photograph. We also note that below iron railings in place of designation as described in the designation report as handsome have been replaced with the existing full height railings. In again replacing the window railings for this project, the design should be based on height and details of the historic railing, which the current proposal does not closely replicate, as we found as we look closely at the pictures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. I don't think there's anyone else.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a few signups beforehand, so we'll be hearing from those people first. Our first signup is Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds this proposal to be largely appropriate. However, HDC believes that the configuration of the current windows and transom should be maintained in the replacement units. Also, the extra bit of extension on the third floor is inappropriate and unnecessary. It clutters an otherwise handsome mass. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Nuha Ansari from the Friends of the Upper East Side. So Nuha Ansari, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Chair Carroll, Honourable Commissioners, my name is Nuha Ansari and I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends Preservation Committee appreciates the applicant's proposal to preserve the main facade of the building, including the return to the historic French doors, albeit with simulated transom bars, and brownstone lintels and sills throughout, as well as the improvements to the 1939 fourth floor addition by recladding it in brick to match the facade and placing a metal cap on the roof. We have no objection to the enlargement of the fourth floor window openings to bring them down to floor level. At the rear yard, our Preservation Committee has no objections to the two-story addition or the bump out on the third floor. We do feel, however, that taken together, the additions on the lower floors and then another one on the rooftop make the rear additions visually intrusive and bulky. In addition, the rooftop seems over-designed and has too much glazing for its proposed utilitarian use. It would also be highly visible from street level. We ask the applicants to reconsider placing such a disproportionately heavy addition on the roof of this landmark building. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Janice Ziegler. So Janice Ziegler, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Sorry. My name is Janice Ziegler, and I'm a resident of 156 East 79th Street. I speak on behalf of myself and other residents of our building. We urge that the Preservation Commission follow the unanimous recommendation of both the local landmark committee and the full board to deny the application. The proposed addition and modifications are not appropriate for this lovely old historic townhome. Among other things, the 14.5-foot rooftop addition and the massive glass additions and conservatory at the back of the building are extremely modern and can be prominently seen from the street, including Lexington Avenue and from other buildings. The proposed changes are contemporary and out of character for the building, particularly the new story that would be added. And the new footprint would be too large for the space, particularly relevant to the other landmark buildings. It would be much higher and larger than all of the other landmark townhomes by comparison. As this is a landmark building, the building's history should be respected. The new addition would undermine the building's quiet dignity as well as its sense of place. I'm surprised there hasn't been more discussion about the contemporary look and feel of the windows at the back of the building. I note that the local landmark committee was particularly unfavorable in its view of the rooftop addition and its height and modernity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we'll be hearing from Carl Gross-Kaufmann. So I will be promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you for the opportunity to be heard today. My name is Carl Gross-Kaufmann. I'm also a resident at 156 East 79th Street. This is a beautiful building. I'm grateful that it's in good hands and being cared for. I'm also grateful that the Landmarks Commission is here to preserve this historic building and its historic nature. As a lay observer, looking at the design, particularly the rooftop bulkhead, is just seemed as obvious as day that just doesn't fit or match a landmark building. It just is out of character. It detracts from the building and it detracts from the general benefit of having a landmarked building. That was my initial reaction. It struck me as well that 2 advisory boards made up of subject matter experts unanimously reached the same conclusion. And so I respectfully urge the Landmarks Commission to reject this proposal. And thank you for the opportunity to be heard.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I am looking through our attendees list and I do not see any further hand raised. So I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends denial. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carol.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to respond to the comments.
Certainly. I think starting with the latter comments, the proposed rear addition, and actually that's probably a good one. I think part of the comments were about the modernity of the infill design at the base of the building, which I feel is an appropriate intervention. I think it is very consistent with a lot of row house style interventions that we see in Greenwich Village and the Upper East Side and elsewhere. It certainly reads as a new intervention and as a contemporary one, but it retains the enframement, creates an enframement in part at the base of the building. And as I mentioned at the outset, the use of the metal in the infill and what we call the conservatory and the rooftop addition is really intended to tie these contemporary interventions together design-wise and play off of the red brick design of the overall building. Some comments about from friends and others about the bulkhead addition. As we discussed, we certainly can make some modifications there to reduce some of the visibility. But really, this is visible from that angle across Lexington Avenue against the building to our right, which is a much taller apartment building. Standing in front of the building, it is, I think, truly minimally visible. The raising of the front parapet, I think Tom explained that. There's also the roofing detailing of that. Certainly, we could keep the parapet where it is. It would be a little more difficult construction-wise, and it might change very slightly the visibility of what you see from the very front of the building. And then the comments on the windows, I appreciate HDC and BSNY talking about the windows. I do believe that all of the windows were installed in the 1920s. That's when, if you look at the size of the window openings, where there used to be stoop entries, there are wider lintels, but the windows have been narrowed down. So at the very most, we would have a couple windows that were older than 1920s, but they all match from the 1920s design. So my sense is, and I haven't been fully forensic with it, but my sense is that those windows were installed in the 1920s. As I mentioned, it works better to have a faux transom. We could do wood windows with a fixed transom above that would beef up the transom bar and change the appearance slightly. So we think it functions better and it looks better with the faux transom, but certainly we could do a fixed transom.
Thank you. Any final questions? No? Okay. So let's go to close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Goldman, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion? Would you second that motion? Oh, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we'll begin our discussion now. This is these two combined buildings, which were combined early in their history, were designated as an individual building along with a grouping of other row houses that were also designated as individuals, representing sort of a long row in the streetscape. And at the time of designation, this building had already an existing penthouse and other changes that came along when the building was combined. The proposal is to reclad the penthouse, raise it slightly, change the windows at both the main level and the penthouse level, and then to construct an addition, sort of a bulkhead addition above that, and then at the back, pull out the rear facade to align with the commission-approved additions on the adjacent individual landmarks, and then at the lower floors, have it come out slightly beyond that. I think it's 3 feet beyond the existing condition. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you like to start this one?
Sure. Okay. Starting from the front facade here, I'm looking at the height and the sense of volume that the raised wall that was discussed create. And I do feel that the proportion of the historic condition height of that setback mass is more appropriate than the proposed. I do really feel that height is very sensitive because you get a little too tall and it starts to become another floor feeling, and that's what it's starting to feel like. I think that's more important than the end detail of where the parapet walls meet the front facade. And because it is a metal coping, I think there's more options to doing a gravel stop type detail than a stone coping might incur as a back wall flashing detail. I don't have an issue with them becoming doors. It's minimally visible, really, that the existing windows have sills under them. I think that the window replacement back to the historic condition I'm fine with that. Maybe some of my colleagues have more to say about the details of the windows. So I'll leave that to them. And then if we can talk about the rear facade, I feel that this is challenging because I feel that the number of additions is starting to become too much. The fact that it is an individual landmark does tell me that the back facade has historic fabric and is important. I just feel like it's because it's being covered completely. There's no dialogue with what's being added to what was historic. And I think that the bottom two floors extending are fine. I just feel that the upper two floors extending as well with the extra piece on it start to completely shroud the fabric completely. I think having a penthouse addition is acceptable if it can be controlled visually. And the fact that it's asymmetric is okay. That it's smaller in mass. I do think we need to work on its height and sense of visibility. It does seem too much. Again, there are some heights that I think the architect mentioned could be taken out to reduce it. And I think that would be very helpful. Lastly, I think that on the rear, if we were to keep the facade, I wouldn't feel so odd also about the big forehead. I don't think that proportion is correct or necessary. Would entertain even adding more windows in the existing top floor if that was desired. I think that's appropriate. But then it speaks at least to fabric below that is historic. Those are my comments.
Just do want to note that the two individual landmarks to the right have commission approved full height rear yard additions. So there is no historic fabric either on either of those buildings at the rear. So that's just something to think about as you think about the relationship of their proposal to those, even though it's not a historic district.
I agree with most of my colleagues' comments. I do think the penthouse is too tall. It's almost 15 feet. It could be cut down almost 5 feet. And it's very visible. I can see through the rear facade, they're trying to use materiality to express modernity, but it's too dominant. It's supposed to take over the landmark building. We should have some piece of landmark, piece of it exposed or something. And I'm at a loss about this facade, the notion of a landmark building having some kind of beautiful metal grill that's so odd to me. It's lovely. And then it's not there. It's landmark, but then we go back. I'm confused about the kind of principle that we should use in looking at these type of buildings. I don't know. Those are my comments.
Commissioner Goldblum.
I think that the comments that were made about the front I'm completely in agreement with. I think that the applicant could, if they wanted to, consider looking at the mansard that was a couple of doors down as a way to do something that would actually improve it. The way I look at this building is very simple. The designation report identifies only the old part of the building as significant. Therefore, anything that's not the old part could be changed, but should not make it worse. So I think that a mansard, there's no question that the penthouse addition makes it worse. So if they wanted to make it better, that's okay, but raising the parapet makes it worse. In terms of the back, it's the same standard. We don't care about context in the case of a single individual landmark. So the notion of contextualizing the rear facade by bringing it out is without basis. And what it does is it erases any evidence, as Stephen said, of the historic part of the building, i.e. the old part, which is not the top floor, but the floor below it. So the floor below it, in my view, cannot be extended or modified. The floor above it, like Stephen said, go to town. You might try to do a penthouse on top of that. I'm open to it, but I think it's got to preserve the historic fabric of the existing building.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginsburg.
Okay, I agree with a number of the comments that have been made. I think starting with the bulkhead, lower it and moving the mechanical equipment down to the lower roof. What bothers me most about the rear facade is that dark gray, I think you were calling it maybe a solarium or something on the third floor. I understand the points and don't disagree with what my other commissioners are saying, but that the facade doesn't bother me too much, but that addition there just makes it too busy. I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I agree with the comments. I think that especially in the front, even though the detailing for the flashing will be more difficult, I think is lowering the parapet will help in this case, don't make it worse. And I think that the applicant has already agreed to lower the top, and I will leave it to the rest of the commissioner to see how they feel about, the structure in the top.
Vice Chair Bland.
Minority we have a front for a minute and then go to the back. I don't know who changes these. Yeah, thank you. My view is that these changes were made for the Landmarks Commission and far before this area was designated. It changed the nature of these two buildings into one different kind of a building altogether. Highly visible roof competition, no attempt to make it anything else. Has just created a different typology to which all these other things that we think about to me don't apply here. I told you something. So therefore, I was in the front. Can we go to the rear? Likewise, again, the typology was completely altered. It's a different kind of a building entirely. Width, height, everything about it changed. So I don't have any trouble at all saying that all of this is fine too. Now, if the addition on the top it is visible, it is visible. If it can be lowered a bit, that's fine, but not mandatory. And partly the reason it is, in my judgment, is because it's against a much taller existing building. So therefore, seeing it is not a problem for me. Again, minority will go, I think.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Thank you. So I'm going to do front then back, if we could switch to the front just for a minute. Thank you. Oh, not to the thank you, but that was okay. So, I do want to say, I think this building, whatever it was transformed to, is a little bit of a gem. And but it is small. And so it is hard to add to it. I think that everything that's going on with the front, with the exception of raising the parapet, is fine. It's just like I don't want to overstate it, but the proportion change to me makes a difference. And then on the back, I think you did a great job with the first two floors. I mean, I think it opens up beautifully. It like you feel the light and air moving in, your use of glass and even having separation between the top. It's just beautiful. But I do think that the addition above it is on the next floor is too interruptive. And I definitely think it gets in the way of the mass of the building. And I also do feel like, and I'm glad you have room, that you need to take down the top so the mechanicals can be less visible. Otherwise, though, overall, it's a good project.
Okay, all right. Thank you all, commissioners, for your thoughtful comments. And I'm sorry, Commissioner Master, please forgive me. Go ahead.
I guess the benefit of going last is that you hear everybody else's comments and you get a chance to think about it. So starting from the front facade, I'm actually okay with all of that. I think the front is fine. Going to the rear facade, I would agree that the first two levels of the rear addition are fine. The third floor addition, I know that some of the comments were that, it kind of sticks out too much. And I think one of the commissioners had said, perhaps looking at a different material to make it blend in a little bit more if they want to keep it. And then in terms of the penthouse, I mean, if we can reduce the height, I would be fine with that. If we can reduce the height of the penthouse and, the mechanicals and all that, I think it would be fine.
So your comments on the third floor are really about the material of the little bustle, but you're comfortable with pulling out the rear facade to align. And Commissioner Lefty, were you also comfortable with aligning the rear, pulling out the rear facade to align?
On the first, double height.
Okay, so not at all above. Okay. All right. So I think, we have mixed comments. We're not going to take an action today. We'll give you an opportunity to think about the comments and respond. I think there are, on the front facade, I think most people were comfortable with the majority of the work, but thought that the height of the existing penthouse should be retained if possible. But I think most people are comfortable with the brick cladding and the windows to doors. There was a suggestion to think about it as a mansard. That's another way to go, another approach the commission has approved with pre-existing protocol expansions on buildings that are designated. But I think we have enough support for it as is, just in its original height. And then at the rear, I think we're mixed. We have some commissioners who are comfortable with the amount of changes, except maybe concerned about the busyness of that third floor bustle. I know because we did approve full height rear yard additions on the adjacent individual landmarks. I see that as sort of a precedent for this building, which has had many more alterations over its time than those buildings did. And so for me, I'm also, like Vice Chair Bland, comfortable with the addition, full height addition in this case, because it really is, it's its own building. It was combined at its time. But others, I think, want to see some preservation of some historic fabric or volume seen at the rear. So I'll leave that to you to think about how you want to address that. And finally, I would just make those adjustments to reduce the bulkhead to the extent possible and limit the visibility of the mechanical units. All right, so we'll see you back when you're ready. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
Thank you.
I will now move to public hearing item number 6, LPC 23-11738, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, block 3466, lot 25, 5734 Catalpa Avenue, the Ridgewood South Historic District. This is a Renaissance Romanesque revival style model tenement building designed by Louis Berger and Company and built in 1909. The application is to alter the facade and install a storefront and ramp.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Juliet Kach, presenting proposed work for our client and owner of the property at 5734 Catalpa Avenue, Ridgewood South Historic District. To figure it out.
You can use the arrow keys. Perfect.
Yes, while we're setting that up, I just want to introduce you all to Haley Ramos. Also, this is your second public hearing item, but maybe a chance for you to meet her all in person. So welcome.
This three-story. The three-story Renaissance Revival building was designed by Louis Berger and Company, and it is located in Ridgewood South Historic District at the intersection of Catalpa Avenue and Underdonk Avenue. We are proposing a new storefront and ramp at existing one-story rear extension that faces Underdonk Avenue and is visible from intersections with Catalpa and 69th Avenue. A comparison of the historic photos and current altered conditions shows numerous non-historic alterations, including the removal of the projecting entrance, horizontal window open, contrasting rusticated brick coursing and windows. Please also note that there is a non-historic brick infill underneath the middle window. Within the historic district, we found numerous examples of business storefronts at one-story extensions that are also very common in the district. One of the examples is located down the block and is shown on this slide, Willow's restaurant. We see storefront on both historic and present-day photos. On the next slide here, we gathered historic photos of various business storefronts within the same historic district, including the Underdonk Avenue. Also, a few examples of the present-day storefronts in the same avenue and close by. On this slide, we are showing side-to-side current facade conditions and proposed storefront. We preserve and repair existing parapet and brick cornice. We propose to install our new storefront in place of the previously altered non-historic windows and infilled entrance door. This is just to give you a better view from the intersecting corners from Catalpa Avenue as well as 69th Avenue. And the third picture shows the view from the residential entrance of the same building. One way of the facade is to give you a sense of the overall scale of the storefront and its relation to the corner facade and other building elements. The enlarged elevation of the storefront showing typical elements we see throughout the historic photos, such as bracketed supports, decorative corners, and window transoms. Lastly, the two sections through the proposed storefront at the bay window and entrance door. You can get an idea of the depth for the bay windows and the extent of the detailing. We're trying to recreate the historic look with the brick molds and things of this nature. The inspiration for the look was actually the Wallace storefront for the Wallace restaurant that we liked a lot. The one-tone, confirming the one-tone color scheme for the proposed storefront. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, let's see if we have any public testimony, and I do not see anybody in the room, so I will turn it over to Gregory Carl to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We did not receive any sign-ups beforehand, and I do not see any hands raised in the meeting. So I will just note for the record that Queens Community Board 5 recommends approval with one suggestion to keep the black railings close to the architectural integrity of the surrounding community. And I'll bring back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much. Do you want to address the railings, the question the community board had about the railings at the front?
Yes, we can discuss that with the community board and, we actually agree and happy to provide.
So you are keeping them?
We are keeping them, yes.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, any final questions? All right, let's go ahead and close the hearing. Commissioner Chu, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing's closed and we'll begin our discussion. And this is a proposal to convert a rear extension into a commercial storefront. The applicant has provided examples of other commercial storefronts in rear extensions of similar buildings and has presented their proposal for their details and the ramp in front. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
Sure. In just looking at it quickly, this storefront looks like it's been here all the time. So my sense is that the applicant has actually done a very good job of not only incorporating this storefront, which has a, sort of an older time feel, even though you're using, metal on the facade. So that it blends well with the building, and I think it seems to mix well with the surrounding area. So I could approve this.
Thank you. Commissioner Master?
I agree with Commissioner Lutfi.
Commissioner Chu?
Yes, I actually know this building. I think it is a nice bookend to the corner storefront and makes a composition to the whole building that's holistic. So, and I'm very familiar with these single story storefronts because they're prevalent throughout the neighborhood. And I think it's very much in keeping and handsome. I think it's appropriate.
Commissioner Jefferson?
Well done, simple, appropriate.
Commissioner Goldberg? Commissioner Ginsburg? Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, but this is the type of example I'd like to see in the district.
And Vice Chair Bland?
Although we didn't have to room, my colleague to the right took the words right out of my mouth, which was, it looks like it's always been there, which I think made a criterion for acceptable.
All right. And I think, while there wasn't a storefront here, there certainly are examples of them throughout the district. So I think modifying the existing openings to create a storefront is appropriate in this case, and the details are done nicely. So Commissioner Lutfi, would you go ahead and read the motion?
Docket 23-11738 54-34 Catalpa Avenue, Ridgewood South Historic District, a Renaissance Romanesque Revival style model tenement building designed by Louis Berger and Company and built in 1909. The application is to alter the facade and install a storefront and ramp. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Ridgewood South Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that historically the one-story extension was separated from the main body of the building by a projecting vestibule, and that the openings at this facade were altered over time, including shaved lintels, leaded glass window installation, and door replacement. Therefore, the proposed work will not eliminate intact significant historic fabric. That the presence of a storefront at this location will be in keeping with other historic storefronts found at one-story extensions at corner buildings throughout the historic district. That the proposed aluminum storefront system featuring bracketed projecting display windows and transoms with a recessed central entrance and a simple profile cornice will be in keeping with storefront infill found on buildings of this type, style, and age in terms of its overall proportions and composition. And that the construction of a ramp will allow for barrier-free access in the least obtrusive manner possible.
Thank you. And Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland. Aye. Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Chu. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldblum. Aye. Commissioner Jefferson. Commissioner Lutfi. Aye. Commissioner Master.
Aye.
9 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. All right, and we'll move to the next item. The applicant is Ruth, but Roberto, our staff person, is going to start the presentation and start to walk us through the slides. So I'll turn it over to Corey.
All right, and this is public hearing item number 7, LPC 23-08090. An application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, block 1475, lot 55. 3745 87th Street in the Jackson Heights Historic District. An Anglo-American garden home style semi-detached house designed by C.F. McAvoy and built in 1924. The application is to legalize the construction of a side addition and to modify a retaining wall and fence installed without Landmarks Preservation Commission permits.
Good afternoon, I'm Roberto Siliberto, landmark preservationist. I'm starting this presentation for the applicant, which is still stuck in traffic. So we are in Jackson Heights, 3745 87th Street. We can see it's on the lower right side of the historic district. This block presents 4 different groups of 5 row houses, attached row houses. Every group presents 2 side gardens and a front yard and a back driveway that is private, not access to the public, with parking lots. We can see on the left, we have the block, and red is marked our lot. And on the right instead we can see the lot with the front yard, our house, an extension that was built without permits, the back driveway, and the 3 parking lots. This application is to legalize the extension built on the side of the building and modify fence and wall in front of the front yard. So on these 2 pictures, we can see the historic picture on the left from the 40s is our building that we are studying today. And we can see that it is elevated from the street of a couple of feet, and there are stairs going up. The front yard is not doesn't have any kind of fence or wall. Well, instead on the right, we can see likely at the bottom of the picture, this is the designation picture from the 90s, that there is a fence and a gate, a metal fencing gate. In the next slide, we can see the other buildings of the same construction, where we can see better what was the situation on the front yard. Specifically, lower wall with 5 wheel of bricks, 2 piers, and a simple metal gate, all in black. Unfortunately, we cannot see that in our building because the picture was taken from a little too close and it's not pretty clear. This is the condition of today. We have a raised wall with the same metal fence applied on top of it, which is in violation. The gate, which was present destination, was painted white, and we can see on the right of the construction there is a 1-story extension that is set back from the front facade. In these pictures, we can see better the extension. It's set back of a couple of 3 feet and presents a brick finishing that is resembling the original construction, and an opening with two double hung windows painted white with the same kind of ironwork that is present on the rest of the building. So this extension was constructed in the early 2000s. They have a DOB permit, but the architect record of that time failed to inform the owner that a landmark permission was required. So they actually did everything. They had a sign off from DOB, and a few years later, due to a fire, they realized that they needed to have a landmark permit. So at that point, they informed Landmark about the situation and they got a violation. We actually issue a permit in order to resolve the problems caused by the fire, but we informed them that they had to legalize what was installed without a permit. So we see that the extension is just one floor, and it doesn't cover anything particular of the building, is on the side. And we can see from this elevation that is set back in it's set back and doesn't take much of the front facade of the building itself. On the side, we can see that it doesn't extend the whole elevation. This is the picture from the front on the left and from the rear on the right. On the rear is taken from the private driveway. Again, this is not public thoroughfare, but what is interesting about this view is that we can see on the right that there is, on the left of our extension, that there is a neighbor extension of similar size. The difference in between the two of them is the treatment of the exterior facade, which ours, the one that we are now presenting, is actually resembling the same brick work of the original building, while instead the other extension that we see on the block present different kind of treatments. This situation happens on different lots, as I already said, of this block. Out of four places where this extension could be built, two were actually built. 4 extensions are now present. Out of these 4, there is this one that we are trying to legalize today, 2 that were constructed before designation, and 1 that instead was constructed without landmark preservation and is now in violation. We see that these are the other 2 that are in the center of the block. These 2 were present during designation, and we see that is similar. They are similar in size and in location of the one that we're presenting today. And we see the 2 of them. So we can appreciate here from an aerial view. On the right, there is our lot. That is the one in where the red pin is. And next to it, there is another extension. And then on the lot next to ours, the other 2 extensions. The only lot that doesn't present an extension is the one towards the left of this block. The second item of this application is about the fence. As I said earlier, this brick wall was built taller, and the picket fence was installed on top of it. Now, the condition of the front yard changed during the years. Originally was sloped towards the street, and instead now is a little higher to have a level front yard. Because of that, they built a retaining wall all around the front yard. We can see that the retaining wall is on the 2 sides, one limiting the stairs, the other one in between the 2 properties, our property and the neighbor property, and then, of course, the one on the street. The proposal that we have today, and we see here the picture of it. The proposal that we have today is to lower again the brick wall, bring it back to what it used to be a designation, reinstall the wrought iron fence, repainted black as it was in designation, bring down the 2 pillars as the height of designation. And the only thing that we are asking here is to keep the retaining wall on the two sides, one for the stair and one for the neighbor, because in that way, the modification of the front yard will not impact too much in terms of excavation. This block presents a lot of different situations in terms of fences and limitation of the properties. With enforcement, we studied the whole lot and we realized that out of 20 different houses, we have 17 that presents the same kind of configuration of low brick walls with picket fence on top of it. Out of the 17, 8 are in violation. And 2 have just a brick wall and 1 has just a fence. So we can go through the whole pictures and we see that is pretty much consistent. Most of them were constructed before designation. And we can see that this is the only one that actually came to the condition after designation was pretty different, came to a public hearing, and then they agreed on lowering the brick wall and removing the fence that was installed without permits. We can see that overall, all of these lots present around the same conditions. This is next to ours. And this is it. The applicant came in the meantime, so he will be ready to answer any question.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking care of the presentation. I'd like to turn to the applicant and ask if you'd like to say anything at this time.
The resident did a great job.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see if we have any questions. Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg, why don't you come up to the front so you can speak into the mic when you answer.
So I just want to be clear, you, the property, the addition was built. So I'm
Sexual company.
the addition was built.
Prior to the addition being built.
Yeah. His architect helped him to file a plan. Good. Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions?
That empty space to the side of the house that's next to this house and the adjoining one, I think typically is a way for cars to drive back to a parking space, but this block seems very unusual because it's a half block.
It's way higher.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Yes. It's at least 6 feet higher than.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And the little tan things in the photograph on the edges of the addition are concrete blocks that are wrapping around the corners.
Yes, that's correct. Can you state your name for the record, please? Excuse me, can you state your name for the record?
My name is and I'm a senior project designer and just architecture.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Yeah, so we'll see if we have any testimony. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on this application? I don't see anyone, so I will turn it over to Gregory to see if we have any remote testimony.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We had one sign in advance for this item, so we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Commissioners, my name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the side yard addition to be appropriate. However, the proportions of the front yard ironwork and wall are inappropriate and should be modified to align with the neighboring properties. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised, so I will just note for the record that Queens Community Board 3 recommends approval. And I'll bring back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, so the Historic Districts Council testified that the height of the railing should, is that what she said? I'm sorry, The height of the railing should be aligned with something else on the street, I think is what she said. Do you want to just speak to that again? I think, because you are lowering the wall. And then putting a black painted railing, I believe, on top, right?
That's very important.
Yeah.
Yes, so. One more time in regards to
The height of it should align with something. So I just wondered what your alignments were. I think it's the only way we can respond.
So the height of the wrought iron fence, we're aligning to the height of the gate that was existing at designation.
Okay, and then of the 17 others on the block that have a low wall with an iron fence, are they at similar heights?
Similar, I'm not sure. I mean,
So.
Just come to the mic so we can pick you up.
So for what we started with research, with enforcement, we realized that everything that was installed before designation has the same height in terms of brick wall, picket fence, and gates. Everything else instead had different heights. So this one will actually align with the neighbor building, which still has the same layout during the session.
Interesting. So the pre-designation, pre-regulation fences and walls are more uniform than the post-designation ones. Okay, and so this will align with those pre-designation, those ones that will be able to stay, and won't have to be addressed. Okay. All right, any other final questions? All right, let's close the hearing. Commissioner Master, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we'll begin the discussion. Commissioner Master, would you like to start this one?
Sure. So I think that although it's not an ideal case, that the extension was built without LPC approval. However, the extension itself, I believe, is appropriate. And the reason is that there are other extensions similar to this in the neighborhood, including right next door. So I think the extension is okay. In addition, I think the fence and the wall, I think that's also appropriate because they're returning to, I think, what is the pre-designation height and the similar black railing that, it was when we had designated. And I think it also aligns with the neighbors as well. So I think I can find this appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Yes, I think that it's appropriate. The side extension is very subtle and small and set back. The front lowering of the wall is definitely appropriate. I just point out that the side wall is probably going to be higher, the party wall, because it's got to retain the earth to the neighbor, which is also high earth. You'll have a higher side party and then a lower wall in the front.
So the idea.
Sorry, the hearing is closed, so we can't, but yes, that's the case. So the side will still be a retaining wall.
Yes, but yes, appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Jefferson.
I agree with my colleague.
Commissioner Goldblum.
I generally agree, except for I think that the brick has to return around the side. It's visible from the street. And CMU as a finish is not appropriate to this block or district.
Brick return, okay. Commissioner Ginsburg.
Particularly since the owner was not informed about the rules, I can support this. And I think the brick return makes sense.
Okay, Commissioner Chen.
I'm saying, yeah, except that I will emphasize that the black.
Yeah. Vice Chair Bland.
I can support it as is.
Okay, and Commissioner Lutfi?
I can support it with some of the additions that were mentioned.
Okay, all right, so I think we can do a motion to approve it with the modification that they finish the return in brick.
In the matter of LPC 23-08090, 3745 87th Street in Jackson Heights Historic District. Let's see. I know that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Jackson Heights Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the extension of the side of the building built without LPC permits has not eliminated or damaged any significant architectural features. That there are other side extensions in this row built prior to the designation of the historic district. That given the size and shape of the lots on this block, any building expansion is limited to the side yards where there is some visibility from the street. That the single-story extension is modest in scale, set back from the front facade, and therefore subordinate to the original house in terms of massing. That the brick cladding, coining, and the white double hung over 1/1 metal windows harmonize with the historic building. And that the proposed lowered retaining wall and black painted fence will return to the condition of the front yard to a grade that was present at designation and will be consistent with other front yards on the block. That the two side brick walls flanking the path will be only slightly higher than the front brick wall and will serve as necessary retaining walls for the front yard. And that we will have a brick return and the wrought iron will be painted black. And that the work as modified will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the building or the Jackson Heights Historic District.
And we'll just add the modification that they work with the staff on the treatment of the return wall, the addition. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Second.
Sorry, second, Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that?
Second.
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson. Aye. Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
9 in favor, 9 opposed, as modified, this passes.
I'll move to the next item.
Okay, and this is the last item, but again, because we are significantly ahead of schedule, we're going to have the staff begin the presentation and hopefully the applicant will be here shortly. And that is public hearing item number 8, LPC 23-09526, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the borough of Brooklyn, block 220, lot 9, 41 Willow Street in the Brooklyn Heights Historic District. This is an altered row house built before 1900 and a freestanding garage. The application is to modify the facade and install a bay window, construct a rear yard addition, excavate in the rear yard, install fencing, and enlarge and alter the garage.
And good afternoon, Commissioners. Marcello Pacheco, Preservation Staff, presenting on behalf of the applicant who should be here momentarily. We are at 41 Willow Street. In the Brooklyn Heights Historic District. It's the corner property on Cranberry and Willow Street. You can see here that there is a structure on the property, a garage structure, and just a study. This is just a study of some of the heights and adjacent buildings. Here on the left is the 1940s tax photo. You can see at this point, considerable amount of the details had been stripped from the front facade. Windows had been reconfigured on the Cranberry Street facing facade. You can see the bay had been removed at the parlor floor, and 2 small windows had been added along that central bay. You can also see that the window heights had been modified at a number of the first floor windows. The strip had been removed, the stoop had been removed, and the cornice was stripped as well. This is a diagram showing a couple of sort of the scope items. There is the proposal is for a new two-story addition on top of the garage structure, a two-story extension at the rear facade, and a new bay window at the Cranberry Street facade, as well as a stair bulkhead. Here are some context views of the corner, looking at directly at the building and some of the buildings adjacent. Same thing here. You can see the sort of mismatch on the windows to the bottom right on this right photo. Another thing that had been modified over time. So here you can see the street facade the streetscape facade. At the bottom, you can see the proposed stoop, restored stoop and entry door. And zooming in a bit closer, there are a few scope items on this drawing, like the facade restoration and 2/2 windows that are being reviewed at staff level. Okay. Here you can see the Cranberry Street side with the proposed bay, the proposed elevation below. And you can see the sort of one of the things that the architect has proposed is to restore the height of the parlor floor windows, and you can kind of get a sense of that on this elevation. There are also you can see the sort of street facing facades of the adjacent buildings and the mansard roof that's part of this garage building addition. Okay, zooming in a little bit. There is a fence proposed behind the existing ironwork that's in plane with the Cranberry Street facade, and you can get a better sense of some of the elements of the addition and the bay. Okay, here you can see some of the adjacent rear facades. There are a couple L's and recently approved additions. Well, I believe the presentation has a couple photos that we can look at. And here's a closer look at the rear facade. But the proposed work here is to continue the masonry cornice to continue from the primary facades and round the corner of the rear facade. And you can see the new two-story rear extension with modified door window openings to provide access to the roof of that extension. Here is a side facade of the garage addition with a stairwell and a section through the building, and you can also get a sense of the pathway that sort of connects. I believe it's an excavated pathway that connects the current cellar with the new cellar below the garage addition. And here's a transverse section. Okay, these views on the left are the photograph, and on the right you can see a rendering of some of the work at the front. And here is a corner view where you can, I believe the top right, the trees have been removed for clarity of the side bay. And finally, at the rear, here is a view of the proposed two-story addition with mansard roof and dormers. Okay, this view shows a little bit of an angle towards the whole property. You can get a sense of the rear addition and its relationship to the site and to the rear yard. Okay, and here is a view looking a little bit above the that sort of that new fence that's proposed, and looking at the relationship to the rear facade and extension, and finally looking towards the garage addition. Here are some of the materials proposed and some examples the applicant was looking at within the district and nearby of certain features that, there we go. Yes, here. 26 through 41. There are similar buildings throughout the district showing, I think the top right shows examples of rear extensions and in a similar sort of height and style, and the below image shows a another garage, carriage house addition. And here are some other examples of, on the bottom left, a more contemporary steel clad bay window and a sort of similar configuration of a rear yard and two-story structure. Here is the site plan. And I believe, I believe this was meant as an appendix, so I don't think we need to go through. So yeah, I think this proposed cellar plan, you can get a sense of the extension at the cellar that connects the two buildings. Okay, and I believe that is all that the applicant intended on.
Thank you. So, Marcello, we're really looking at the bay window on the side, which is being introduced. There was historically a bay window there that was removed prior to designation, but they're proposing a sort of contemporary version of that bay window, along with a two-story rear yard addition that is sort of a contemporary version of a T-porch addition. And then the addition and new facade treatment for the garage, I think sort of trying to look to some of the carriage houses that they showed in their presentation as a model. All right. And then there's a fence as well, right?
Yeah, there's it's a bit dark on screen there, but there's a fence at this level that occurs in line with the facades. Correct.
Okay. All right.
And also just to add to that, there's also some interpretive detailing, like the cornice as it wraps around the house, that are not matching a historic condition, that are part of what the commissioners would review here as well.
Okay.
And Marcello, could you just clarify, I think a prior scheme, the windows proposed were a 2/1 configuration. Was that a last minute change?
That was a change in the last several days to go with 2/2 throughout.
And that's more consistent with the style. And
that's consistent with the style and yeah.
Okay. All right. Commissioners, any questions?
Just one.
Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
In your research, the existing garage, was it new, or was it essentially a carriage house before?
Sorry, what was the first?
When does the garage date to, the existing garage? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, I didn't get a sense from the applicant when
it looks like it's maybe a 1930s one-story garage building. Yeah.
The garage building.
There is a tax photo at the beginning. I'm not sure if you can maybe just see, maybe just what you want to see. I'm not sure if there's any evidence of it, but we don't think it was a carriage house at all. It's site built as a garage at some point. Yeah.
It was an added garage.
Right.
So the implication of that is that you can't use the typology because it wasn't that, right? I mean,
Well, I guess one could think of it this way, that the garage is maybe in itself not architecturally distinguished, and that one could do a new garage building in this location. And then there are carriage houses in the historic district. So I suppose one could think of that as a model. I think, it's something we have, we actually have some testimony from the community, so they may be able to also give us a sense of some of the characteristics in the district. So why don't we move to testimony now? Judy Stanton.
Thank you. Judy Stanton for the Brooklyn Heights Association. We do not support this application. We are disappointed that it is being brought to a public hearing in such an incomplete state. The application treats the corner house as a blank slate without any coherent narrative of its history. This is an 1867 house, significantly altered in 1936, for which a major modification is now proposed in 2023. The commission should insist on a level of detail in this application that justifies the progression in this history and which explains how the renovation will be carried out with a sensitivity to design and materials that any corner house in this historic district deserves. On the front and side of the main house, it seems the goal is to work with the 1930s alteration rather than attempt a restoration of the 19th century original. That goal is acceptable, but the design is weak. The stoop and bay window are merely functional without relating to the remaining 1930s design, especially the unique cornice. On the rear of the main house, we do not think it is appropriate to wrap the historic 1930s cornice to a location where it never existed, nor do we find it appropriate to blow out so much of the rear facade, which is highly visible from Cranberry Street, just to add a starkly contemporary addition that neither echoes this house nor any houses, whether from its original or altered eras. You might have been looking at some examples in the Cobble Hill Historic District, not Brooklyn Heights. The proposed carriage house sticks out like a sore thumb, both on its own and in relation to the main house and the block. First, it is too tall. At most, it should be only 2 stories high, in keeping with similar types of buildings on Cranberry Street, such as the 19th century building attached to 68 Hick Street and the 20th century house at 14 Cranberry Street. Second, the proposed design is a hodgepodge, mimicking historic styles with its Gothic drip window surrounds and Second Empire mansard roof, even though this would be a 21st century structure. We think that replacing an authentic 1-story 1930s garage with a 3-story faux historical carriage house pastiche is inappropriate in terms of scale, style, and overall character. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see anyone else in the room, so we will now turn to our remote panel to see if we have anyone here to testify remotely.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We had a couple of signups beforehand, so we'll be hearing from those speakers. The first of which is Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds the proposed renovations and additions to the front and rear facade to be appropriate, given the Brooklyn Heights Historic District's history of supporting well-executed modern work within the district. That said, and given the resources being deployed to realize this project, We believe strongly that the applicant should be required to do a robust and historically accurate reconstruction of the front facade and the stoop. The juxtaposition of a quality reconstruction of the primary street facade with similarly well-conceived and detailed modern elements will provide a far richer project for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we will be hearing from John Graham from the Victorian Society in New York. So John Graham, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Graham for the Victorian Society in New York. A written description of the changes which the applicant is proposing for the main house at 41 Willow would look good on paper. The construction of a new stoop, the parlor floor entrance, and the removal of masonry infill to restore the parlor floor windows to their original height. However, the result shown on the drawings appears to be a row house which has been stripped of all its details. The applicant needs to go back and study the historic picture they've provided. We strongly recommend that any work approved for the two street facades be restorative in nature. At the stoop, this would include the installation of treads with a bull nose, Italianate style handrails, and larger newel posts. The parlor floor windows should replicate the original arched segmental heads, which are still in place at the basement and second floor windows of the facade. And the new parlor floor entrance should likewise have a round arch transom as it did originally, so typical of the Italianate style. We will also note that we made a site visit and discovered that the basement entrance in place right now retains the historic painted wood and glass door and the leaded glass side lights seen in the tax photo. We've attached photos. We hope that this 80-year-old material can be retained and used at the new understoop entrance. We support the alterations at the visible east-facing rear facade. The addition suggests a modern version of a T-porch, but the details of the proposed oriel window facing Cranberry should be based on the original oriel seen in the historic photo, rather than the details of this modern rear yard addition. The other area of work being proposed is at the garage, a structure which makes no contribution to the historic district. We support the proposed vertical addition here, turning the garage into a carriage house, something more appropriate in this district. However, the awkward size and placement of the windows on the second floor and what seems to us oversized dormers on the third floor should be restudied. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised in the attendee list. So I will just note for the record that Brooklyn Community Board 2 recommends approval. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn back to you. I know you weren't here for the presentation. Marcello presented it for you in her testimony. So the Brooklyn Heights Association, but I think you heard the testimony from the Historic Districts Council and the Victorian Society. And generally, the testimony spoke to the interpretive nature of some of the details and not being accurate restoration of some of those features. And then I think there were sort of mixed opinions about the idea of turning the garage into a two-story building that evokes a carriage house, but finding that those proportions and details, I think, don't successfully resemble the T-porch, the carriage house model that you're striving for. So if you want to address any of those comments at this time.
Okay, so my name is Tom Kowalski. Yeah, so this actually just we'll just go about it. Okay, so the issue here was that we got a hold of the tax photo, which is the stripped down version. And that was originally our starting point. And then at some point, the other photo resurfaced. This is actually done, there was the original scheme done by Tom Vanderbilt a thing like in 15 years ago. And then someone who knows him found him somewhere in archives that other photo. So, but in the meantime, already we kind of, with the client, formulated the kind of goals, what we want to achieve and all that. Originally, it was not even talk about stoop. So I convinced, yeah, let's just bring it closer to what could have been or would have been or was, at some point. And then we saw the photo. And then obviously the photo is not super clear. So it's not like we can reconstruct one-to-one what was there. So it has to be some sort of interpretation of whatever we do. And obviously there's no Cranberry, Willow Street, there's no typical details. I mean, everything is different. So we kind of made a decision at some point, let's kind of take a kind of simplified, more contemporary kind of approach and try to bring those elements back, all of them, but in a kind of simplified manner. And obviously there is, argument can be made, both ways, so that was the decision. Then with the carriage house, it was also the previous scheme was much more voluptuous. And so we kind of tried to scale it down as much as possible. So we took some details, like the brick details from the other side on Cranberry Street. There's the double tall multi-story building, multifamily. So on the other side, I think we have just yeah, that's the other side right here. So this is kind of the other side. So we took some of those detailing here and kind of transpose onto our, obviously the three-car garage was kind of disproportionate. So that's why we convinced the client to go with two, reduced it in scale so that it's more appropriate to this street. And then the detailing of, obviously we didn't want to make the next story, the third story, which is the attic, as a full story. So we kind of took the some of the, I know you show the sample, the examples, the inspirational. So I mean, there's a house across this on diagonal on Cranberry and Willow on diagonal that has the mansard roof. That's a regular townhouse. But then also we found, in Brooklyn Heights, examples of yeah, like for instance here, there's the for instance, there's a 3-story carriage house. There's this house. I mean, that's also sort of a carriage house with a mansard roof. So there's kind of examples more or less, reminiscent of what we're trying to do. And of course, this is the other example is to the the 2-story extensions at the back, which are right on the street and are visible from the street. So that's because that was the main issue at the committee board hearing. So,
All right, questions, Commissioner Goldblum?
Couple. First of all, it looks to me like from the photographs you're cutting down a parapet above the cornice. The existing photos show the cornice with this kind of Greek key thing going on, and then some masonry above it. Am I misreading that?
I think it's really no, we're not touching the cornice.
Okay.
No, that stays as it.
Okay.
I mean, we repaired doing all that stuff.
All right. And then is it your intention that the carriage house be viewed as an extension of the main house or as a separate structure?
Yes, that was a good question that we had, and eventually we determined that this is more or less, it's not really extension because doesn't abut, but at the same time it's in proximity, so it should be in the family of languages around, but not the start. Because the reality is that the garage, I think actually it's a new structure, even though we don't have the pictures, but I went inside and there's a put in place concrete, believe it or not.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So it's a put in place concrete, the garage structure, which is then clad with the brick on the outside.
But from a kind of conceptual perspective, you're looking to have it look like a totally different structure.
Well, we're trying to more be concerned with the block rather than with the corner building.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Right, other questions?
Just want to clarify one more thing, and I may have not said it clearly the first time, but with the cornice, I know you're keeping the existing cornice that came in later on the front and side facades, but you are proposing to install a new matching design on the rear facade that doesn't exist now, right?
But you can't see right now because it's summer and leaves are covered, but there's a really homeless condition of the cornice basically standing up by about 3 feet out in the air.
Right, and so I know a lot of this is confusing with the existing condition of what's being proposed, but by and large, the front and side facades and rear facade, a lot of it is staying the same as it looks now and as it did in the, I guess, in for the 40s. But it's the parlor floor windows are being extended in a way that's similar to what they look like originally, as you can see in that oldest photograph, because they're shortened now. It's putting in an entrance at the parlor floor and a stoop, which again have simplified details that do not match the original details, but are interpretive. And then the Oriole window on the side. Those are the elements that kind of relate to the original details you saw, but again, don't match them and they're interpretive. So I just wanted to clarify those particulars.
Right. So I think, when we come to the discussion, it will be sort of a discussion about what period this building is representing. Is it the 1930s or is it some aspects of it are trying to go back to the original, like the length of the windows, but they're not. Other aspects of it are not detailed as they were historically. And then the wrapping the cornice around will be taking 1930s cornice and wrapping it onto the rear facade where it never existed.
Can you just go to the next image, which is the contemporary image? When you had on before this one, you get to see. Next page. Next page. Keep on going. Stop. Can you zoom? You can't zoom in, but it doesn't look to you like there's some kind of parapet above the cornice or like an extended wall above the cornice. Right here.
Yeah.
There, that thing. And your intention would be to leave that alone. The reason I raised it is because the old cornice probably went to the top of that.
For some reason, I was only interested in. I don't recall.
Not again. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
So
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the hearing is closed, and again, this is a row house that was altered by the time of the tax photo in the 1930s with the removal of the stoop and many of the details, and including the bay window on the side facade and window and door surrounds. And the proposal is to lengthen the windows on the front facade to return them closer to their original pre-1930s alteration length, but then to install a new door, stoop, and Oriole window that are more modern and simplified in their details, to wrap the cornice around to the rear facade, the 1930s cornice around to the rear facade, to construct a two-story rear yard addition, and then to enlarge the one-story garage and with a new design, a new facade design that I think seeks to emulate carriage houses seen in the district. And so we'll begin our discussion on that. I'm going to turn to our resident commissioner, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll just note first, it's unusual, I think, in my experience here that Community Board 2, which has, I think, they used to at least have a very sophisticated landmarks committee, and the Brooklyn Heights Association, which has a very sophisticated landmarks committee. I know it and her well, to be on opposite sides as they were. It's fairly damning. Some of the testimony was fairly damning. It seems to me as if what we have here is some very beguiling renderings almost like a scenographic approach to the problem. And it's sort of hard to understand the concepts with the fairly stream of consciousness presentation that we've had also. So it's a little bit difficult to get into this, but it does seem as if what's been proposed is a series of adding back what was stripped out from the house long ago, but now in a contemporary way, and with contemporary techniques and forms even. And although I certainly speak favorably about contemporary design in a historic district, we did just last week for a project across the street, what we did architects for. But it seems maybe inserting contemporary design elements within a historic building to restore it kind of to its former glory, or at least some form of it, is conceptually wrong. And I think that what needs to happen here, and unless I missed it, it's not highly detailed at all. And we need to see, and I would need to see these details and to understand them a little bit better. And I would suggest that in this case, it may be more appropriate to mostly than contemporary insertions. At least that's my gut feeling here. But I will say that the notions of what the elements are generally interesting and generally seem right. In other words, new stoop, new bay window, the addition on the back. We've seen a lot of those in Brooklyn Heights, and the fence. In fact, almost everything you see here, you see in Brooklyn Heights. For those who want to see precedents all around, you can see every one of these in many cases many times throughout the district. Fences on side roads like this that face the street are almost everywhere. It's rare that it wouldn't be there. The conversion of the carriage house or the garage to a carriage house seems well, I think it is too high. I can't imagine it being 3 stories, although it's kind of interesting. Again, a scenographic approach to this, as opposed to accepting as a things. Like a 77 it's really garage, which is maintained as a garage with a rooftop back on top of it. Anyway, I'm sort of losing steam here, but I think I'm trying to make my point is that it's conceptually confusing, and I think we just need to see a lot more detail and the concepts of what we're trying to do here. But when I first looked at this, I said, "Oh, it's kind of pretty, isn't it? It's kind of pretty. It is sort of pretty." That's what I'm saying, scenographic. But I don't think it's rigorous enough yet to be understandable or approvable as appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah. Referring to my criteria, I was going to say,
Commissioner Ginsburg.
I would divide this into 2 projects in terms of how I think about it. And so the main building, although I agree with Commissioner Bland, some of the details need to be developed. I'm not sure the cornice should wrap around where it wasn't before. I think conceptually can be made to work without major changes in just developing the design. I'm going to take a somewhat minority position on the garage, although Commissioner Bland sort of hinted at this. I don't want the garage to look like it was designed 100 years ago. I think that's misleading. I think if the addition was more 1930s or 2020s, it would be better. It maybe need to be a little smaller, but I just find that trying to make it look like it was always there, at least scenographically, is, to my mind, not the right way to deal with it. But I could totally understand that others disagree with that.
And I actually think you were not that far off of that when you were thinking of 77 Columbia.
77 Columbia Heights, yes, exactly that.
Okay.
A 1930s garage building with an addition on it, sort of relating to that age. Commissioner Goldblum.
Thanks. I think that the main building, we've done a lot of townhouse renovations, if I recall correctly, even in this district, but we did do modern improvements on traditional buildings. The problem here is that the building itself is being restored to a non-historic degree. It's kind of sitting in the 1920s, more or less, which was slightly corrected. The window sills are dropped, and that's great. Stoops added, that's really nice. But the general level of the building is left in that cooler, stripped out period, which has the effect, I think, of reducing the contrast between the old and the new. So for me, I think the new bay window, the new T-porch, yes, it does need more detail, but I think it could work. But I think it could work in the context of a more historically informed restoration of the existing building. And that would include the cornice. I think the cornice is peculiar wrapping around, but I think they could work with staff to see what conditions pertain in other cases and try to follow that. I agree with Fred on the carriage house. It should be 2 stories. We are in the scenographic business here. We do it all the time, improving buildings that are brand new that look like they were built in the 1880s, but significant modifications. But you got to do it right if you're going to do it. If this kind of goes halfway. It's got Gothic heads on the windows, but then a really kind of semi-modern cornice and a relatively modern-ish mansion-y mansard. It's kind of not. It's like a little bit of a catalog mashup. So I think you got to kind of pick your flavor and stick with it.
Thank you, Commissioner Jefferson.
Yeah, I agree with almost all the comments, and the architectural strategy of this to restore elements on each facade, the front facade is stoop, the side facade, bay windows, the back are kind of a tea room. So it's an interesting concept strategically. I was just concerned that, when I looked at the historical picture, it looks so much stronger, and these were so weak. They were like diagrams, and of course there could be detail, but I was looking for the architect to say, I want to make this a powerful element in the facade, a historic one, not just a diagram. And that's what I need to hear to make sure that what's added then have some presence, some strength. The scale of the garage, though, if you go back to the elevation that shows the garage in relationship to the building next to it. Another one. Because the garage, the building to the left, you have one that shows the building to the left. That one. It looks out of scale. It's like work. And I was thinking, if you really use the garage, a carriage house typology, it would feel better in relationship to the rest of the block in terms of the design. But right now, it's just too big. It's too large.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Chu.
I agree with many of my fellow commissioners' comments. I specifically also feel strongly about the dialogue and comparison that Commissioner Goldblum raised between what is historic and what is new. I support a modern interpretation and well-detailed bay window, but I want to see that the fabric that it's inserted into has been studied and carefully restored. I also agree that the older historic photo has so much more strength to it that than your modern insertions could really sing when they're next to them. I do feel the cornice is way too insignificant. The weight of the more historic photo there seems more appropriate to me. I really like the fact that you brought those window proportions back and added the stoop. I did also find that the rear addition was quite attractive in your renderings because I could really read a sense of that's the historic brick building and there's a nice modern addition to it. To that, I think that maybe even you might think about that approach to your garage addition. It is essentially an accessory use to the house, and there's a relationship on the lot to this as a complex. And maybe that's an opportunity to make that piece a bit more contemporary, like your insertions onto the historic. Maybe that's just suggesting that might be another way to approach it. But I also feel strange about this large addition here on the back that wants to feel historic, but is in no way historic in that reading and this aesthetics. The mansard is also a bit odd to me because it reads like a big house here. It's not really what that was. Most of these houses that have pitch roofs tend to be wood framed, and the masonry ones tend to have more flat roofs and planar facades. And I do think that you've got your precedent right to the left there. And that would be a comfortable bookend on your side in terms of massing.
Thank you, Commissioner Master.
Yes, I agree with a lot of the other comments that the commissioners have made to define the style better in the main house. I think there is some work to be done with the cornice. In addition, especially with this drawing, you can see that the garage should not be the 3 additions. It should be a maximum of 2. Pretty much I agree with the other commissioners.
Okay. All right. So,
I apologize. It's okay. I see that we're not being left out. I almost don't need to add anything, but I do want to say something that I think is very important, which is when you get a project like this, a corner house on an important street in Brooklyn Heights, it's very, very important that when you come to us, your plan is well baked. And I am sorry, I find, and everybody has said it in their own way, but you're a good architect. We just saw a project from you with amazing potential. And this one is not really fleshed out in. Your thoughts are there, but it's not coherent, and it's not tying together these 2 elements in the site on this corner. This is not a carriage house. It is a garage, and it can be given more height, but it can't look like something that has no connection to this home. And I feel like, I do agree with Fred's sort of cinematic comment because they're beautiful, they're almost like photographic renderings where we couldn't even see any details on them. And we can't even conceptually approve a project that doesn't have a lot of detail in it. This is important, and that is why when the Brooklyn Heights Association speaks, every building in this district is critical. They know it very well. And you need to take more care. And for me, and I am certainly embrace the modern, I think this is about embracing what has been here and doing it in a way that really adds value to these structures and to the streetscape at this place in this district. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad you added that. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your comments. So I think we're not going to take an action today. We're going to have you think about the comments we've heard. And I think there's a lot of consensus around the height of the carriage house / garage. And that, really maybe 2 stories is the place to be. But I think in terms of your design approach and how you're introducing, and conceptually it may work to introduce sort of modern interpretive elements in it, but I think the dialogue needs to be really thought out and carefully studied with a lot of rigor. And then I think your concept may be something that is better conveyed and embraced. So we'll take no action today, and we'll have you back when you're ready. And thank you all, commissioners, for your hard work today. We will not see you next week, and we'll see you on the 8th.